this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Alas, poor York. I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now? How abandoned in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar. That's the fifth act of Hamlet. That's a seminal moment in that play where Prince Hamlet is actually considering the skull that has been taken up by one of the grave diggers in Hamlet's world. And he's considering it as he stares into those empty sockets. It's a moment where I think that Hamlet comes to a realization about his mortality and the mortality of his family and everybody that's around him. And he's also longing for something in the past because York was the court jester. He was the person that entertained everybody. He sang, he told jokes. Today, we're going to explore an absolutely fascinating case that involves a skull, not too dissimilar from York, but a skull also that at one point in time in life produced fine sounds. It produced musical education for many people that had never been trained in music. Today, we're going to have a discussion about the discovered skull of Gertrude Elliott Littlehale. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I am so excited about this episode. I was of recent with my buddy David Mettleman of Othram Labs in the Woodlands, Texas, just north of Houston. We visited for some time at CrimeCon in Nashville, and he laid this case on me, and I had to share it with you because you love history as much as I do, and you talk about dragging history, kicking and screaming into the modern era.
Yeah.
I don't know of a case like this, certainly that we've covered on Body Bags.
Ever
at all. And
everyone
I'm
needs to hear this, Joe. Okay. Yeah. Everyone needs to know that there was a skull, partial remains found in a bag in 1985 on the beach. Actually, it was on a small little Channel Island, but we're talking Oxnard, California. Oxnard, not in the onion fields, Oxnard by the beach, in the water.
Right.
A bag of bones. And the skull is in there. 1985. So as police try to identify, hey, we got a skull. It's human. Got to figure out whose it is. So 1985, you're thinking probably in the last several years, it's because how does something end up in a bag on the beach, right?
Yep.
And they do their normal work that they would do in the mid 80s, and they come up with nothing.
With the limitations of the 80s.
Very limited compared to what we have now. Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah.
But at the time, they were feeling pretty confident back in the mid 80s that they might be able to figure out what's going on here. They didn't. And it kind of sat there for a while when they didn't have an immediate identification. Well, as the years went on, it finally ends up with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs. And this is like in 2016. So you've got a skull found in 1985. Cannot identify it. There is no ID. But as things have advanced, NamUs has, hey, let's do a reimagining of the skull and try to put a face on this so somebody can recognize it. Could be a loved one, somebody they haven't seen in a long time. Let's see what we can do. So they did. And they did a clay rendering of the skull and what it would look like as a face. And they took pictures and they circulated it all around. I mean, here's this unidentified person, the body found the skull found in 1985. Still nothing. So Joseph Scott Morgan, while we're at CrimeCon, says, dude, you've got to see this. It's a skull found in he called her didn't call her Ventura County Jane Doe?
Yeah.
Ventura County.
Yeah.
And he said, you're not going to believe this. This goes beyond what we know about body bags as a show. So, and in this particular case, we actually do have what's left of a body in a bag. So body bags, the skull called Jane Doe. And after 1985, Joe. And by the way, just so you know, when you think, hey, that was just the mid 80s, not that long ago. Well, actually 39 years ago now, friends. If you graduated from high school in 1984,
yes,
your 40th anniversary is this year. Okay, your reunion rather.
It's around the corner here.
Your 40th reunion is happening this summer, right before fall homecoming football game. Yes, you're old, Margaret.
Yes, let's grind it in there. Hey, I got to tell you something. When I've known David for a few months now. I actually got to visit Othram Labs, and I think we've talked about this before, but I've got to tell you, first off, for those that have not met David, he is, and I am not, I don't think that I am overstepping my assessment here. David is arguably, yeah, I can say this, one of the brightest people I have ever encountered. And when it comes to DNA, Dave, I want you to hear me, man. This man, as far as I'm concerned, is at the same, he's in the same strata as Elon Musk. He is that brilliant, specific to DNA. And you know what? And he has got, this is the cool thing about it. He has got a heart of gold in the sense that he understands the power of the tool that he wields. And people, there are a lot of people out there that say or think of themselves as doing good. He is one of these true individuals that is an altruist. He is truly an altruist because his goal is to get the unidentified identified. It's not simply about solving crimes.
Wow.
It is helping people, Dave. And I say all that to tell you, as you know, as brilliant as David is, when he told me about this case, you could see in his eyes, they were literally sparkling because it's so, what are the odds going back all the way to 1985 and then moving forward through 16 and all of the attempts to try to figure this thing out.
And it's kind of interesting to point out, Joe, just so you guys know, Joe had talked to me about David Middleman and Othram, and we both have, I'm familiar with it probably more than most, but not nearly as much as those in the industry, not nearly as much as you. But I was glad you kind of gave me a little background on David Middleman and what kind of a person he is, how he thinks, and things like that. Because if you remember, you guys were talking in the VIP room at CrimeCon, and I'm Dave Mack, the radio idiot. I'm just, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Oh, yeah, give me a hug. And that's not David Middleman. If he doesn't know you, he's going to look right through you because he doesn't have time to mess with idiots. And he could sense right away that guy's an idiot. And he just, it was like, okay, I'm going to be really polite for what I have to endure. Now, here's the beauty of this. I knew this ahead of time. I knew it going in, but I didn't know who he was. I'd never met him before. And you were talking to his wife.
Yeah,
and
Kristen is equally as brilliant. Oh my gosh, what a team, man.
I was so glad you had told me about them because when I realized, like I said, after I bum rushed you and realized I just stepped into a really intense intellectual conversation that I'm not allowed to partake because I'm an idiot. And I realized I'm outnumbered here. So I realized quickly to get out before I was found out, and which was the goal. If you don't play on the same field as other people, you got two choices: prove you're an idiot and stay there, or leave. I left. I grabbed my bagel and went on down the road. But having noted that David Middleman is that level of brilliance, and his wife as well, and what they're doing with Othram, believe me when I tell you, friends, I thought that it was funded by, I don't know where I thought. I actually thought maybe these types of places like Othram have like funding from, I don't know, the unicorn, that they have like this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and they just delve into it to do these incredible things. The science that they're doing, and that, there's so much science that takes place in the world today that has no real world application for you and me. It does for science, but not in our daily life. What Othram is doing is they're actually providing answers to people who have questions about a loved one. They're actually doing good work. They're actually changing lives. They're actually doing things that not even that long ago couldn't even have been imagined by the best think tank in the world. And they're accomplishing them.
You're up in that strata, I think, when you begin to consider this as maybe when we were kids and we were watching Star Trek, and they went into the transporter room and they flipped a switch and everybody just kind of disintegrates and then reintegrates on the other end. Right. And you think that that's not possible. And obviously that's not possible right now.
In our minds, but yeah. Middleman, he probably already has it figured out.
He probably does. He is just that brilliant. And look, they have to this point really provided answers. They're up. The altitude right now, these cases that they've provided are in excess of 300. Yeah. But when you consider how many of these unidentified bodies out there, this is just the start. And the reason it kind of really pricks my heart, I think, is as a former death investigator, a medical legal death investigator, Dave, I stood over so many remains during the course of my career that I had no idea. I had no idea who this was. And unfortunately, many of the remains went into what we refer to as a potter's field, and I've seen it, where the ground was trenched out. We would hold on to remains as long as we could from a storage standpoint, and they'd be mass buried. It was almost, it had this kind of, it was ominous to see it. You see images from like war zones where people are being buried en masse, and that might be placed into a bag. The dead will have these aluminum, if you have an intact remain, will have an aluminum ID bracelet that's put around the wrist, one that's put around the ankle, and they're placed into a disaster pouch or body bag. And they're buried, along the length of this trench. I've seen that actually happen. I've borne witness to it. And it's the saddest thing. And so many of these people, I thought, if I could have just had answers. I actually had a discussion with somebody a number of years ago that was working at AFIP, which back then it doesn't exist in the current format, but it's the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. And you know what they told me, Dave? I was amazed by this. Did you know that we had so many unidentified dead in the Civil War that a lot of those skeletal remains were collected? And to this day, many of those remains remain in cardboard boxes and they're on shelves in DC. And they can't, the story was they will hold on to them for as long as they can because they can't give these individuals proper military burials. And I was fascinated by that, because there's a lot of unknown soldier graves out there and all that sort of thing. And I was thinking, in my wildest dreams, I was thinking, wow, wouldn't that be something if you could take technology like this and apply it genetically to these unidentified remains that we're holding right now, and find maybe there's a lineage there that you could trace down and try to determine. My family, as a result of the Civil War, I have two ancestors that never returned, and they never knew what happened to them. And so for me, I began to think about this, and then I think about Gertrude. Don't you love that name?
It's a great name.
It is a great name. I began to think about Gertrude.
By the way, Gertrude is the name of the Ventura County Jane Doe. We haven't mentioned her name yet.
And the fascinating thing about it is that Gertrude was born in 1864. The Civil War back east was still raging. There were people dying and being killed by the bushel. But today, we finally have some answers about an incredible mystery.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Dave, I have to make a confession. I love old names. I've got a lot of them in my family. My grandmother, who I referenced on this program multiple times, one of the sweetest souls that ever walked the face of the planet, as far as I'm concerned. She had, I guess, I don't know, would it be called an antique name? It was her. Her name was Pearl. I had an aunt named Roxy. Eunice, I'm not too particularly fond of that.
Eunice.
Myrtle.
Wow.
Juanita, which still is used today. Mm-hmm. And then I've had rubies and all kinds of these interesting names that they use.
All the characters used in a Jim Croce song.
Yeah, exactly. And they go back years and years. But, the subject of today's episode led this remarkable life for a woman that was born right in the heart of the Victorian era,
right
here in the U.S. Born actually in Stockton, California, Dave.
And when we look at Ventura County Jane Doe, her skull found in 1985 in a bag, and when it was first discovered and turned into police, they thought that maybe we're investigating a murder. Maybe this is somebody who has been recently killed and somebody stashed the body. There's all kinds of things police are looking at. But as they started investigating, they couldn't find anything that fit. And again, this is 1985. And as we mentioned earlier, it took years to get to the point where they could identify who this person was. So, Joe, how is it possible that I find a skull in 1985 and you're telling me that this Ventura County Jane Doe is a woman named Gertrude and that she was born during the Civil War. How do we go from 1985 to 1864? Now, if you said 1964, I'm like, okay, 21-year-old female. Okay,
Right.
I got that. But no, we're talking 121 years old.
Yeah, isn't that quite something? And there was an effort made back then to run through the normal course of an investigation. Whenever you find a skull,
what is that normal thing, Joe? What happens if today, while I'm in the woods next door walking around with my grandson, and I find, let's say, a partial skeleton. Let's say I find a skull in a bag out in my forest right here.
Right.
And I'm going to call somebody. I guess I'm not calling Ghostbusters. I'm going to call the county and say, hey,
you're going to punch in 911.
Actually, I'd be calling you and James Shelnut. Those are my first two calls.
Don't call me, please. Don't call.
Joe, who do I call? What do I do? I got a dead body here,
call
man.
me and get a recommendation. My recommendation will be 3 digits, 911, and that's it.
I'd call Nancy Gray. She go, Dave, you need an attorney. Get one now.
So if you do find even any element of what you believe is a human skeletal remain, the most important thing you can do, even if it turns out, because the lion's share of people that find a skeletal remain, and I've had this happen, are not finding human remains. Most of the time, it's amazing. It seems like most of the remains that I would have people show up to the medical examiner's office with, or I would be summoned out on, turned out to be hog bones most of the time. And hog, some type of pig that had been barbecued, and they'd been tossed away. That
ain't Gertrude. That was Homer.
No, it's one of those things where you're generally not going to come across it. Who finds more human remains than humans are dogs. And this happens a lot. Dogs love skulls, and they will pick up a skull. I cannot tell you how many of these cases. I've got some actually as morbid as it is, some kind of humorous stories behind these events. But I would have families that would say, "Oh my God, I looked out in the yard and Fido is playing with a skull, chewing on it. Can you imagine this?" Well, what does a skull look like? Well, to a dog, first off, it looks like a ball. Have you ever seen a dog take a ball and put it between their paws and kind of play with it and that sort of thing? And also, secondarily, they're at a very base level, they're seeking protein. That's what carnivores do. They want to bite into that bone, and they'll gnaw on these bones. And they've got these, skulls have real weird kind of angles, and they will wrap their paws around them and begin to gnaw on bones. So this is not unusual, but this is not the case with Gertrude's remains. You actually find them in a bag, and that goes to prove that, first off, some other human has handled this item, because skulls just don't wind up in a bag. All right.
Yeah.
Particularly in a modern context like this. And it's tossed away. So when we would go to a scene, if we had a single skeletal element, we have to work on the assumption that there are other remains around there. And you go to where that skull is located. That is essentially ground zero, and everything else radiates out from that, where you're searching this entire area for any other skeletal remains. Because, look, you've got a human skull. Why do you have a human skull? Why is it not buried somewhere or encased somewhere? Why is it not in a mausoleum, or why is it not in a coffin, 6 feet under? So you have major questions, and it's a horrific thing to come across, obviously, but for a forensic scientist, it's very intriguing.
Joe, how do you get to that point with where you have a skull and you actually do start the identification process, as they did in 1985, finding a skull in a bag? The normal process, what would it be? Because not everybody, it costs money to go and do a lot of the DNA testing. And this is beyond that, because you are dealing with a skull. You're not dealing with the whole body.
Yeah.
Where does it begin?
Well,
the investigation.
okay, let's go back to 1985. We're just in the wake of Sir Alec Jeffrey, who was the first person to actually apply, in a real sense, DNA technology, DNA science to crime science.
Okay,
so that's where that kind of. So we're literally, kind of in the immediate wake of that in 1985. This is still brand new technology, and it had not kind of filtered down. And Sir Alec is actually a Brit, so that's where it was first used. And so it hasn't made it. I'll put it to you this way: it hasn't made it stock in California at this point in time.
Okay.
So
in 1985.
In 1985. So what we would have done back then is, first thing you do, you're going to reach out to a forensic anthropologist.
Okay.
And this is what they're going to do. They're going to race, they're going to sex, they're going to age, and assess for any kind of trauma that skull. That's what they're going to do. So they're going to try to just visually, because races are different and the morphology of their skulls, there are certain markers that anthropologists look for. They're not as distinct as they used to be, because you have a lot of genetic overlap nowadays, as opposed to in the past where there was this kind of separation. So it's kind of a finer science now. You have this idea of sex, and sex, again, is one of these things that's, I guess some people could say that it is kind of subjective, but there's a lot of considerations that anthropologists run through this list of things, where these markers that they're looking for that would give you an indication of a skull. And in determination of gender with a skull, what we're looking for in that sense, and I love these terms that that anthropologists use, that we use the term robust when referring to a male skull. And here's a term that not everybody hears on a regular basis. When it comes to female skulls, that we use the term gracile. And gracile actually means fine. Like you and I have these kind of protuberant brow lines, as males. They're kind of robust up here. The bony prominence on the back of our skull, the occipital protuberance that's back there, they're there. You can see it. We're that way. Whereas a female skull that would come from similar races, that similar ages, is going to have a finer appearance to it. So you'll have this kind of gracile nature that's not robust, like a male skull. It's going to be a bit finer. And so that's one of the things that they would have done back then. And then they're going to look at age at the time of death. So let's see, how can we describe this? One of the first things that you look for, if there are teeth, you look for wear patterns in the teeth. You can determine what side of the mouth somebody chews on, for instance. And I ask my kids at Jacksonville State all the time when I'm teaching. I teach a class called Clandestine Graves, and it's a blend of obviously clandestine burials, but also forensic anthropology and also osteology. And I'll ask them, okay, everybody take the tip of your tongue and run it along the surface of your teeth. Right now, can you determine which side of your mouth you dependently chew with? And most people are right. They chew on the right side. And so the wear pattern on the teeth will be worn down more on that side as opposed to the left. Now, as we get older, teeth begin to wear down. That's one of the ways we age skulls. Also, where our sutures fuse together at the top of our head. You think about the fontanelles that babies, the soft spots. You've got one that's anterior and posterior, front and the back. Well, that fuses together. And Dave, after a period of time, those little lines that you see, any kind of skull that you see, like there'll be a model of it, like at Halloween, you can see the skull and they have these little lines on. Those are suture lines. That's what they're referred to as. And it's where the skull kind of locks together. Well, over a period of time through life, those areas begin to wear down. And you actually have something that's referred to as suture line obliteration. So the more that those are worn down, the more that those are worn down, the older the person is. You've even got them on the roof of your mouth. I did a study at one point in time on, what was it called? Palatine suture line obliteration. And I presented a paper or a talk one time. And your palatine suture, that's in the roof of your mouth. What would commonly be, you actually have suture lines in the roof of your mouth. So just chewing, your mouth moving all these years. And it seems very subtle in life, but there's wear. I mean, if you grab a handful of your hair or press your fingers down onto your scalp and move it back and forth, that seems very passive. But just imagine how many times you smile, you frown, you raise your eyebrows over the course of your life. The suture lines begin to wear. Okay. So back then in 1985, that's one of the things that's really the singular tool that they would have had to have worked with. And I can almost predict what had happened at Ventura County at the medical examiner's office, Dave. That skull had been sitting on a shelf, and they probably convened a committee at the medical examiner's office. And, a few years later, look, we've had how many, hey, folks, how many unidentified remains do we have? And they've got a log of them, trust me. And they'll go through it and said, oh, wow, this is the oldest. Let's see if we can dig into this a little bit. Now it's 2016. All these years later, let's see if technology will reveal anything. The problem is that when they first started, I might catch some flack for this, but I don't really care. The clay modeling. Now, I don't have much of an artistic eye, but it's rare that I will see a clay model rendering that looks spot on to anybody. But here's the rub with this as well. That clay model that they were trying to breathe life back into, that person had been dead for over a century.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
I think that what many people might not know about Dave and I, we both love old movies. Particularly, we're always throwing lines from Mel Brooks movies back and forth at one another. And I think I can speak for you, Dave. One of your favorites is, as is mine, is Young Frankenstein or Frankenstein. Oh, yeah. There we go. And Igor. And one of the essential pieces to that hilarious movie is that they're trying to create the Frankenstein monster, and grave robbery is involved in that. And isn't there some indication that that's what's involved in Gertrude's case?
In this case, look, you have a skull found in a bag in 1985. It takes 21 years before they can even do the clay head, the reimagining of what this person may have looked like. And 21 years from the time the skull is found, and that's all they really have. And it took a tip.
When it comes to Gertrude, they did have a lead on grave robbers, didn't they, Dave?
And that was the tip. I think that was the tip that was called in. And ultimately, once they realized they were dealing with somebody not recent, and I think it opened them up because, like I said, the clay, the whole idea of doing the clay in 2016 was hoping somebody would recognize this person. And it's at the age that they think that the person died. And does anybody is this your daughter, your mom, your aunt, whatever? Assuming it was a contemporary skull. But then they did get a tip, and that opened them up to, okay, now we got to really look. But they had to go the DNA route. And this is what really fascinates me. It's the DNA that we hear about all the time solving crimes. But in this case, it's not just the DNA, because the investigators had to take the information they were getting back about the DNA and then tracing it back. They had to find something to compare it to. Yes, we have DNA out of this skull, but it doesn't mean anything unless somebody else has either put something up that could be found, at 23andMe or whatever. I mean, there are so many things that are not happening for every person on planet Earth. Where do you go? So they end up having to go to Othram. And the part that bothers me, Joe, and I really mean this, that Othram has to crowdfund. If it's if it's my relative, if it's something I'm working on, that they don't have. And I did think that for some reason, we hear so many people of great wealth that donate money to worthy causes. And I'm thinking, this is something that should be so funded. These are the first people on planet Earth that should have flying cars. That's the kind of work they're doing,
I know.
They should have everything, and they don't.
Yeah, I know. And you want to try to aid with this as much as you can. But that's the beauty of what Othram has developed, Dave.
Right.
David has a very specific methodology that he has developed and I urge everybody to visit Othram's website, othram.com. And what was applied here was a methodology that David has developed called forensic grade genome sequencing. And so with this tool that this man has created is almost mind-blowing. He can actually take samples from a skull that is this old, Dave, and be able to render it down so that he can extricate a DNA sample from this. And from this, they build this out. They build it out because at Othram, not only do they have these scientists that work at a level that I really cannot intellectually appreciate. I'm not at that level.
You were telling me they can only work for 45 minutes on a case because it's so intense.
Yeah, it's very intense. It's labor intensive. You're talking about doing these fine skills, that and they have to be very, very careful. And it's like being in a surgery suite. You have the potential to contaminate everything.
Wow.
So when you go there, you see them, they're like in spacesuits, man. I mean, I know that sounds fantastical, but
neat.
they're no, really.
Wow.
And David and Kristen have created this environment to facilitate all of this. And man, let me tell you, they've built this thing up from the ground up. Now, they obviously have investors that are helping them, but, on day-to-day cases, they need assistance. And so when it comes to Gertrude, when David's team utilized this forensic grade genome sequencing methodology, they actually have genetic scientists that are there working these cases. They've got another section within that laboratory, Dave, that are genealogists. I mean, he employs full-time genealogists. How amazing is that? So
wow.
They take...
That's what you would have to have with this, though.
You would have to. You're going to be walking around in the dark without a genealogist as a part of this, because their worldview, you take the complexity of this kind of genomic mapping that's going on and development of, through the sequencing that they do. And that's all grand and it's all fine, but how are you going to plug it in? Well, they've got a couple of open source databases. 23andMe, by the way, is not part of it. Okay. Right. But there are these open source databases which are limited that people have donated genetic sample to. Mm-hmm. And Dave, they were actually able to find Gertrude's relatives.
That's what got me about the actual investigation that goes into this, beyond just the DNA. A lot of us tend to think, well, they have DNA. What else do they need? And it's like, because we're not all in and out of, there are those of us in the political paranoid sector that think everything we have is being monitored by government at some level.
Right.
But when it comes to actually doing it in real world stuff, it doesn't exist. And these people have to figure it out. These people, meaning scientists, the genomists, and all that they get together and build the genealogy of a family tree based on a skull that was found in Ventura County, California, that was in a bag with rocks in it to soak it to the bottom of the channel where it was found. It boggles my mind. But Joe, how once they're able to start building the family tree, and they were given a tip that there had been a grave robbing and that this skull may have been part of that. I have yet to find out why. I don't know the why. I know the grave robbing tip came in, and I know police were able to utilize that in finding out what really transpired. But we don't know why this grave was disturbed or even when, do we?
No. And I've worked cases of grave robbery before.
Have you?
Yeah, they're horrible. I mean, they're absolutely horrible, and people do it for any number of reasons. You have these people that are out there that think that they're going to go conduct some kind of ceremony. So they re-victimize families by virtue of, and what they're involved in. I'll say it very plainly. This is desecration.
Yeah.
This is desecration of a tomb. And in Gertrude's case, they had a family mausoleum. So you've got remains, Dave, that are presumably above ground. So remember how I mentioned like groundwater impacting remains and all that? That's not what you have necessarily in this case. You have somebody that is actually going into a mausoleum. And, I know I run on about New Orleans, my hometown, but for those of you within the sound of my voice, if you've ever driven through New Orleans, one of the things we're famous for are graves. We have above ground graves because the water like I said, it destroys everything that we can't bury because we're beneath sea level there. So you have to bury above ground. And what happened and what has happened in previous cases, they will intrude into like a family mausoleum, make it through the door, the access door, which is no small feat. Some of these things are built like bank vaults. You have to be purposed to do this. And then if you've ever looked inside of a mausoleum, they're works of art. I've seen some of the most beautiful with stained glass windows and all this stuff and marble. And they'll go in and they'll take a sledgehammer. We don't know that that's necessarily the case here, but they'll take a sledgehammer and they'll knock the side or the front out of one, depending upon how the crypt is set up, and they'll knock a hole in it and then begin to pull things out of it. All right. And isn't that horrible when you begin to think about it? And that apparently is what happened in Gertrude's case. And they were able to build out this genetic structure through Othram's methodology, and they came up. Now, Gertrude did have a daughter, didn't she?
Okay, well, actually, okay. Once we were able to get all of this, found out she was born in 1864 in California to Glenn Elliott and Lyman Weston Elliott. She had a sister, Louise, and a brother, Theodore. Gertie, as she was called, married James Merritt Littlehale. Together, they had a daughter, Louise, in 1908. Sadly, Gertie died in 1915 at the age of 50. She's got a 7-year-old daughter. Okay, so she was a little on the old side for having a child.
Particularly during that day and age.
Yeah. I mean, in her 40s when she has her child.
Do you know why it took her so long to have a child? I don't know if you know. I got it. This is this is a huge reveal here.
Okay.
In my earlier comments about York, York was an entertainer, right? He was a court jester that touched Hamlet's life. Gertie actually was a highly regarded and accomplished musician and vocalist. Her parents, now imagine this trip. They were from Stockton, California.
Right.
They put this child, after she graduated from high school in 16, they put this child, I guess, on a train and sent her to Boston. And she studied at the Boston Conservatory there.
Oh, wow.
Did that for 2 years and dig this. Got on a boat and went to Europe and studied at multiple other locations there before she finally came back home and became this fantastic, sought-after musician and vocalist where she would teach voice training and musicianship. And so she had lived this incredible life, particularly for a woman during let's face it, during the Victorian era.
Right.
And which just makes this all the more fascinating. That out of all the graves in the world that they could have chosen, that's the one they did. And so she you've got this person who made a mark during their short, very period of time, this very short period of time of their life, 50 years. And she was remarkable in that sense. Now you take what Othram has done, and she is now in the news again because this just has dropped, and she's made another mark after, in excess of 100 years.
There's some peace in that knowing, but it's such a deep sadness to know that your relative sat unidentified as Ventura County Jane Doe, thinking she was somebody that had been killed recently in the 80s even. That's what they thought. And finding out she was historically significant.
Yes. And you know, Dave, it is very sad. But you know what? Here's the cool thing about this. There's actually a bit of hope here. There's actually something that we can come away from this story that gives us all hope, and certainly people that have, like myself, that have stood over the unidentified for all of these years. The hope is that now there can be answers for, I think maybe what we thought was going to be an unsolvable puzzle for so many years. And it comes in the form of the Middlemans. It comes in the form of this organization that has been created with Othram. I have people that approach me all the time saying that I wish there was something I could do. I wish there was something I could do because I've always been fascinated by forensics. I've always been fascinated by detective work. Well, saddle up. Here's your opportunity. Here's your opportunity to do this. I would urge everyone to visit DNAsolves.com. That's DNASOLVES.com. DNA Solves. Visit that website. This is where you can see the cases that are currently waiting to be worked. Those cases that there are no answers to. This is your opportunity to fully engage, and it doesn't matter. You can donate money. And it doesn't have to be tons and tons of money. All right. Just a few bucks. There's a way to contribute. It's going to be tax deductible. Get in contact with them. Look over the cases, find one that you're interested in, and lend a hand. Listen, you have the ability and you have the power to do something that somebody like me never had the chance to do. I tried to provide answers for those that remained, and I failed many times because of my limitations. My friends, those limitations are beginning to fall away. Here's your chance. Dig in, help these folks out as best you can, and again, visit DNAsolves.com. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This February, Aldous Hodge returns as Alex Cross, your favorite detective on television, for Season 2 of the hit show Cross, premiering February 11th exclusively on Prime Video. Fresh off his capture of the infamous serial killer The Fanboy, Cross teams up with the FBI to hunt down a vigilante serial killer targeting corrupt billionaires. As the case unfolds, Cross navigates a moral crossroads where the lines between justice and vengeance are blurred. Catch Season 2 of Cross, with new episodes dropping weekly starting February 11th, only on Prime Video.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.